The worst horror movie I ever saw was fucking great.
Hello and welcome to This May Hurt a Bit. My name is James Strayer and this is...
John C. Myers.
And we are a horror franchise podcast discussing each film in popular and not so popular horror franchises. And today we are talking about Psycho from 1998. Now, just to remind everybody from the end of last week's episode, I don't think either of us have seen this all the way through, or if not, in a very long time, huh?
Yeah, I've never seen it at all.
Yeah. I know I've seen parts of it, like on cable or something, so this may be the first time that I've actually sat down and watched this.
Yeah, I mean, technically I've seen it, I guess, in the sense that I've seen the 1960 Psycho, but I have not seen the Gus Van Sant Psycho.
Yeah, exactly. So this movie carries so much baggage. Mm-hmm. Like, it's hard for me to think of another movie off the top of my head that carries as much baggage as this, except for maybe like some crap like BVS or something like that. But like, just something that is so divisive, or people just are so vitriolic. And I was honestly, I mean, I hope our listeners know by this point that we do try to find good things in these. Like, we don't want to be just another like snark fest about everything. And
just some of it.
Just some of it, for sure. And like that, I'm not precluding problems or anything like that. But right. my point is that like, I really wanted to go into this just being like, you know what? I'm going to find something I like about this. I'm going to be a contrarian to the people that hate it, even though, oh man, this one was tough for Mr. Sunshine over here.
I don't know if you can enjoy this as a film, but as a sort of, without sounding like too much of a dickhead, like a metatextual exercise. It's kind of amazing.
Yes.
But it's weird. Like I'm wrestling with it, but it's something that the whole time I'm just watching kind of slack-jawed, what's happening, and trying to like, I can't just sit down and enjoy the movie for what it is, because I don't think you're supposed to.
Right.
Because it's wearing the fact that it's a remake on its sleeve, and it's letting you know it's a remake.
Sure.
It is daring you to enjoy it in some fashion.
I like that. It's daring me to enjoy it, because looking back on it, I can say, other than the performances and the people who are cast in this movie, I cannot say that I enjoyed watching it, but I've enjoyed thinking about this movie over the last week or so. I've enjoyed like kind of ruminating on it. Now, have I come to any sort of like great final thoughts about it? I don't know, but I've enjoyed kind of like playing it back and forth in my head, kind of like thinking about it. And maybe it was the friends we made along the way that was the point of this film. Maybe it's like the thinking about it was the point. And right. I have a feeling I might end up trying to stretch too much in looking for that kind of thing, because I'm trying to give it a fair shake. I really am. But gosh.
Like it's challenging in that it wants to wear its failures on its sleeve as part of it. Mm-hmm. It's not that he set out to make a bad movie, but the whole thing, according to Gus Van Sant in retrospects and whatever, he's talked about it different ways, and we'll get into it a little bit later. This is an experiment.
Yes.
And so like, it doesn't matter if it works or not, because it's an experiment. Like that's that's the purpose of the experiment. It's not necessarily like, well, it didn't go the way I expected it to, so it failed. It just sort of is to see what we can do here. And so, first of all, one of the things that I found that I immediately had to get over is that it's not a shot for shot remake.
Right.
There's huge swaths that are exactly the same, but there's other parts that are not. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little bit strange in that it's like a cover song, but then there's just occasionally some drum fills thrown in there.
Yeah.
Like it's just, it's random. It's shorter than the original. There's a little bit like chop your editing in places. Sometimes the framing's a bit different. The whole blocking of the first scene is entirely different.
It's very, And
so on one level, it makes you aware of those things. Like, oh, I really liked that in this scene. And now that it's not there, does that work as well? Or what's it trying to do here now that this is different? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But again, like, I'm not enjoying it as a movie. I'm enjoying about it, thinking about the other Psycho.
Yeah.
As an exercise. And so, but there's part of me also that's like, you were coming off of Good Will Hunting. Yes. And you did this.
No, but
that's kind of amazing in its own right,
That's what I love about it in a lot of ways. And so I'm going to sound like a little bit of a tool bag for saying this, but I kind of have to. But like 4 years after this came out, maybe about 5 or so, I was Gus's assistant for about 6 to 8 months when I first moved to Portland. And so I was a fan of his, and long story short, I ended up doing like personal assistant work for him and stuff. He's an interesting guy. He is massively talented. And I understand that may make me like a tad bit biased on here, but like, I'm just saying like, this guy is super artistic and super interesting. And let's not forget that he's made a lot of amazing movies. So this is not a case of somebody trying to make a remake for a cash grab and is a not talented filmmaker. This is like, I feel like you kind of have to give him the benefit of the doubt of being like, no, this guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And so, but where that ends up, I don't know. But I'm just saying that like, this is not somebody who lacks talent who did this.
Well, right, and it's not just an unfettered act of hubris. He
maybe
knows,
some hubris.
I mean, there's some of it, but like the fact, I think the fact that when in the beginning scenes, there's Hitchcock always puts himself in the movie in Psycho. He's outside the window of Marion Crane's office, just standing there in a cowboy hat, back to the audience. In this one, he is yelling at a guy and pointing at his chest, and that is Gus Van Sant that he's doing that to.
I love that so much.
If you're attuned to it and you see that, you're like, oh, okay. So he's not just like, kicking Hitchcock down the street in the background. Hitchcock's like, you idiot, what are you doing?
There were so many great interviews with him about this too, where it's just like, my favorite of all time was when someone just said, why did you do it? And he just said, so no one else would have to, which is such like a hand wavy answer that I kind of love. And I think he was probably just tired of getting asked about it after so long. Mm-hmm. But there is a longer interview that I read about this whole situation where he was interested in remaking something because they kept trotting out these remake ideas out of the vault. And he was just like, well, why not just try remaking something that's actually really good, which runs counter to what we always say, remake something that didn't work so well the first time. And years prior, he put the bug in somebody's ear to make Psycho. Everybody said it was a terrible idea until Good Will Hunting came out and swept the Oscars. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, Gus, baby, that idea you had, let's do it.
I love it now. It turns out like I didn't get it, but now I get it.
But now I get it.
I can make money off of you.
What, $60 million or whatever to do this experiment? And I don't know, Gus Van Sant is enough of a, for lack of a better phrase, kind of like an art school kid that I'm sure at the time he was just like, oh my God, they're going to give me $60 million to remake Psycho. I'm going to do it. And there's something kind of amazing about that in some ways, but I don't know.
I'm always fascinated by that kind of stuff. Like John Borman, that like on the heels of like Deliverance or whatever, made Zardoz.
I know.
Which is like, you had the juice and this is how you used it. Like that stuff's always amazing to me.
Oh, completely.
And in this case, like you said, like I do think there is an artistic idea behind it. And he talked about how he was worried that they really only wanted Gus Van Sant as a director because actors were interested in working with him. And so then they're like, well, we can get stars attached to this and that will sell the movie. Rather than being like, well, we actually like what Gus Van Sant does, because there's not specifically, I would say, and I have not seen all of his movies.
It's been years for me.
He doesn't necessarily have like a specific authorial style in the sense that like Tarantino or Wes Anderson, that big, like really obvious, even like Kevin Smith, I would say. But like, he's very idiosyncratic and makes these strange movies, but he's also experimental. You could argue that like the only other big budget person that does this, I would say there's two. That there's Soderbergh, who's very much like a one for me, one for them kind of thing, but also like is expanded into the more like, streaming and this and that to like get his stuff done. And because he does a lot of genre stuff like that. But also to some degree, Robert Zemeckis, because Robert Zemeckis is always like tinkering and doing like weird stuff. And then he'll put out like the Polar Express, which is horrifying. Yeah. Or like, that Marwin Call or whatever that was garbage or whatever. Or the Beowulf thing. Like he's always just like technically like, what can I do here? What can I do here? And they'll gamble on those, but like a sort of artistic kind of gamble like that, I feel like you don't see as much now. And so it's wild that that's the route that he took with this. Yeah,
definitely. And the films that came after this for him were Jerry, which is a tough watch, but it's very interesting. And I can't even remember the Elephant. That's when I was doing assistant work for him while he was shooting that film here in Portland. friend of the show, John C. Worsley and Corwin Light Williams doing the video game sequence in that movie.
which is so funny, because before I knew that, when I was watching that movie, I was like, I hate when people have like, they make stupid video games like Spike Lee movies like that, where it's just like walk around, shoot people. Who would play this game?
Yes,
and then I find out that they made it, and it was very funny.
And it was very, it was on purpose to shoot the people in Jerry in that video game. Yeah. And then he did the Kurt Cobain biopic, Last Days. He did Milk. Milk was a big one. It was a very good one. And I remember, it's funny, I remember seeing that script lying around his workshop when I worked for him. And I was just, when he made that, I had long since stopped working for him. And I was like, oh my God, he's finally getting around to making Milk. That's cool.
That's cool.
But that had plenty of celebrities in it and big name A-list actors and that kind of stuff. So I guess that is the outlier. But yeah, a lot of his films afterwards have just been like these more like kind of art house, smaller budget things. And I honestly, I don't believe that it's that idea of like, well, Psycho remake was so reviled he couldn't get any money to do anything. I think there could have been a little bit of that, sure, but like, you don't need a giant budget to make Jerry. Right. That is a purposeful small film.
And it's also interesting how the for lack of a better word, the blame for these things gets laid. Because like at the time, Hollywood was sort of in popular culture in general was starting to turn on Anne Heche. Because they viewed her as like, oh, well, she just came out as gay to, as a publicity thing. To hop on Ellen's because she was dating Ellen. And then you hear all this stuff about Ellen now and you're like, oh God. Yeah. Who was the more toxic member of that relationship? And the answer is society, man. No, but it's like, so there was some back and forth there. I'd heard some story about like that she was asked to not be on the red carpet of 6 Days, 7 Nights.
Oh, wow.
You can actually see in the movie, she drives by a poster for it.
Oh, funny.
But like she was asked not to be, and then Harrison Ford was like, well, then I'm not going to do it. And they're like, oh, well, then it's fine then. So
right. Good for him.
So it's like, I don't know if she took some of the brunt of it because, a lot of the focus was on, like the focus went away from the idea of the hubris, although it was still there. And like Gus Van Sant did say that, he did take a lot of shit for it. But I think that people really came down on Anne Heche and Vince Vaughn about it.
Yeah. Vince Vaughn for sure.
Yeah. But like that raises the question of the, it's part of the whole thing of like, well, did you want to just watch them do impressions of those actors, or did you want them to do their own thing? But then if they're doing their own thing, why are you shooting the movie that these other people were in? You know what I mean? Like you don't put the George Clooney Batman into the Christian Bale Batman universe. Like those are very different things. So like they're the same character, but like what?
Have you heard of the multiverse, John?
Yes. Well, yes. That's what I'm getting at here. So this is an alternate universe Psycho that this exists when the young Kirk splits off in the J.J. Abrams movie. You're actually watching a universe where this Psycho is the only existing one.
Yes.
It took a lot of shit. There was that famous Fountains of Wayne song that they made fun of it about William H. Macy's performance of Stacy's mom. Stacy's mom has got it going on. Stacy's mom prefers Martin Balsam. That one.
Oh, that.
Yeah, terrible.
Terrible, awful.
That got in my head yesterday. Psycho, it just went right in there.
Right.
But yeah, so it's kind of weird because it is like he's doing a very different performance, and like a Psycho movie with that performance in there that's kind of built around it to a certain degree might work, but this one isn't. And like Alfred Hitchcock knew what he was doing hiring Anthony Perkins. In fact, I watched some of this. There's a Shudder series called Queer for Fear.
Oh, yeah.
There's a section in part 2 where they're talking about Psycho. In fact, they have Oz Perkins on, Anthony Perkins' son, to talk about it and like what that did to his career. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the wrap up. But the fact that like Hitchcock knew that Perkins was sort of struggling with his sexuality a bit. Okay, well, we can use that for Norman. Yeah. Whereas like Vince Vaughn doesn't have that same vibe. You can't really have like the relationship to the mom couldn't be the same with the way he does it. Whatever. Like it's just weird. And so to put that performance in this package of the other movie, it makes you appreciate all the differences. Make you appreciate what Psycho does really, really well.
That's true.
And like the blocking, the soundtrack, the performances, and the way it all works together is that if you change some of that, then it starts to feel a little weird. And was that the goal of the whole thing?
And Gus Van Sant may not know that either, if that was the goal. I mean, the thing that I keep coming back to, and he does allude to it in an interview at one point, where it's just like, I think it's an amazing experiment in the sense that you can have the same script, you can have the same shots, you can have the same roughly blocking.
Yeah.
The magic just ain't there, baby. Like you can have the same setups, and then it's just, there's so many other things that go into making a film. The production design was almost the same too. Like, when they go into Norman's back office with all the taxidermy and that kind of thing, I was just like, oh, that sure is that back office. What I really miss there, and this is another huge thing, is color versus black and white. That affected my enjoyment of this movie so much, and I think it like really nailed it home in that scene, because you want those big shadows. You want the big black and white and the shadows and the imposing Norman Bates over the lights and the shadows of the taxidermy animals. It just sort of looked like a painted up room with some stuffed animals stuck to the wall and it just didn't have gravitas.
On its face, like it's sometimes by Christopher Doyle, who works with Wong Kar-wai a lot. I believe did Hero, if I'm not wrong on that. But like just amazing, beautiful use of colors. And this is a very sort of specific looking movie, and I like the look of it. But because I'm watching it thinking about Psycho, does it work as well? Not so much for me. I will say one thing that this movie does do extremely well is the additional characters. Julianne Moore as Lila Crane and Viggo Mortensen, like those characters aren't just there now. Like they have lives. And it's funny because the Julianne Moore Lila Crane is so much more the Lila Crane from 2.
I agreed.
Nothing against Vera Miles. Vera Miles was great.
Completely.
But like, Julianne Moore has that so like, I am not taking any bullshit. Just like, I'm pissed.
I will burn down this motel if you don't tell me where she is.
And that is so much more the Vera Miles from part 2, which I thought was interesting. Whether or not that was an influence on her, I don't know, but it did make it a little bit more active of a role. And then, Viggo Mortensen is no longer just this hunk of wood. Sam Loomis, he's
just
like,
a hunk.
He's got a character. He's a hunk.
Yeah.
And
we know right away in that first scene where the blanket slips off and you get the whole rear of the kingdom right there with Viggo and
the return of the king.
Exactly.
Yeah, but which apparently there's a story that like the they're like, okay, we're doing a remake, but I mean, come on, Gussie, this is 90s audiences, baby. This is the Go-Go's 90s, almost the turn of the century. We need some more nudity in this thing. And Gus Van Sant was like, okay, I'll give you some nudity.
I mean, I don't know how you talk about this in the most proper way, but it's just like, you don't need to tell Gus Van Sant that you need to show a hunky dude's hinder. I mean, come on, it's great.
But like that whole first scene was interesting because like, talking about the blocking is that instead of having in the scene with the Janet Leigh at the beginning, their bodies, the positioning, the way it's framed all reflects like their argument that they're having and like sort of who's in control and who's winning, whatever.
Yeah.
This one, it's so much more just like close up and and much more like sexy.
Yeah.
It's really focused on the luridness, which I love how shitty that hotel looks.
Right.
Because in the first one, in the original, it's just a hotel, but this one, like the goop like coming out of the window as you're flying in, and then it just is seedy shit. Then you're hearing people fucking in the other room, and
yep, notice that too. Yeah. Oh, and lest we forget the very, very smooth opening shot that Gus was able to get through the window that Alfred just could not get because of lack of technology. I do, especially when your opening shot is better than the original one. I know that Gus Van Sant probably has a lot of humility with this, but it is kind of funny that your opening shot is like, hey, I was able to do what you couldn't do, Hitchcock.
Yeah. If nothing else goes right, I did this. So.
Yeah. There you go.
This is like, I don't want to say peak Julianne Moore, but like Julianne Moore was huge at this time.
Absolutely. You got half of P.T. Anderson's troop
exactly.
here.
You got Julianne Moore. You got William H. Macy. Philip Baker Hall shows up.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw Boogie Nights for the first time, I felt like I was being introduced to every good actor that I've never seen before. And I'm a fan of all of them since.
Which it occurred to me, I'm like, I have not seen William H. Macy in anything in a long time. And I'm not saying he hasn't anything, but
TV show for a while. I think
he's in that Shameless show. Which my partner watched, but I never did. But it is still just like, oh yeah, I really like William H. Macy, and I forget that he's kind of got that Mammoty background that I think he uses.
Oh yeah.
Here.
He'll always be Little Bill to me.
That was a role that I think he does a fine job, but it's like I still prefer Martin Balsam.
I feel like William H. Macy like really does a great impression, and his look and his way of acting really feels like it belongs in a 1960s, late 50s kind of thing, you know, which is another thing that's kind of hard to put your finger on, because they're using the same script and they're not really updating a lot of the technology and stuff like that. And they're still kind of talking in a 50s, 60s way in a late 90s thing. There are those little moments that don't quite jive all together. But Macy's performance really carried all of his scenes for me, because I'm like, you seem like a guy stuck in like 1958, and I want to hang out with you.
Kind of dumb, but I
and it started on that extreme close up too.
It started on the extreme close up, and I think maybe that was it. It's just like he doesn't have the Balsam face. Like Marty Balsam's face is just like hello.
Totally.
Whereas you're just like, oh, it's William H. Macy, and I'm comforted by this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Another absolute improvement, or to me anyway. Like I just think this was some ingenious casting. Chad Everett as the Texas oil guy. When I saw him, oh my god! Immediately, I'm thinking of Mulholland Drive.
Oh yes,
he imbues that Tom Cassidy. He imbues that with so much more sleaziness, with so much more like a lot of the innocence of the first one. And while I will absolutely sort of give this credit, at the same time, a lot of the sort of making the subtext text, making the implicit explicit, I didn't necessarily enjoy.
Yeah.
But in this case, like, he is laying it on slick, and he's so much more like gross than the original.
You know, sometimes I can't keep my mouth shut.
And I just liked that choice. And in
Sure.
fact, they added a line. They're supposed to be in the original one when she's about to leave. Marion Crane is like, "Oh, my headache."
Yeah. Do you feel ill?
Oh, it's just a little headache.
Need a weekend in Las Vegas, playground of the world.
I'm going to spend the weekend in bed. Thank you.
Only playground to beat Las Vegas.
Only playground better than Vegas.
Yeah.
Hitchcock couldn't have that because that was too risque.
I know it's an easy thing to say, you know, putting words into a dead man's mouth, but because Hitchcock was such a fan of sleaze anyway, I think that he would be a fan of Van Sant putting that line back in and just be totally. Attaboy, you know, you're going to get around it. I'm all right with this. Because
it's, oh man, he looks like he's been jerked, first of all. Like he's just like, you know, like George Hamilton-y skin, and just, he totally embodies that character.
Yep.
Just disgusting. And like Rita Wilson's character is Caroline, who was, I think, Hitchcock's daughter in the original.
Mm-hmm.
Her character, like everyone in general, I think is a lot more malevolent in this. I think like the Caroline in the first one is like ditzy. It doesn't realize that she's like putting down Marion and like lifting herself up. With this felt like much more like calculated. Yeah. Same thing where I felt like Marion felt a little bit more conniving. Mm-hmm. That might not be the right word, but like it seemed like more natural for her to be like, yeah, I'm going to take this money.
Yeah.
Where even though it's not that I know that's going to happen, because I still enjoyed Janet Leigh doing it, but it just seemed like that was the case. And like Vince Vaughn is more openly creepy or whatever. Like he doesn't have the comfort that Anthony Perkins brought.
Sure.
There's just a lot more like the bad is much more front facing in this one.
Right. Would you say that James Remar as the patrolman also echoes that? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think some of it, and I meant to rewatch the part, because like I don't remember her when he wakes her up in the original. Does she like try to take off right away? And he's like, "Hey, don't try to drive away."
I can't remember.
Like that wasn't the case. I thought he was just like, "Hey," you know, because she's trying to play it cool,
right?
And, like immediately running from the cops seems like a bad move, but
exactly.
He seems like James Remar seems like he's just doing an impression of that character, which I don't mind because I just like James Remar, and that's a perfect casting for that. Like that same
completely. Yes.
I thought I enjoyed him a lot. And same thing with like different but the same James LaGrosse as the used car dealer. Like he brings a little bit more skeeziness to it.
Yeah.
That I think for updating it works. And I also just love, by the way, outside of performances, I'm on the run. Low-key, I got to ditch this car and buy a new one. You know, I'll get out with my giant parasol people in the 90s have.
Totally.
Just ridiculous. Anne Heche just pulls out this, like, it looks like an umbrella you would find in a drink.
Yeah,
like
right.
it's that kind, and it's gorgeous, but it's still just like low key. Way to go.
Yeah. Let's be on the run. Now, let us not skip over James LaGrosse too quickly here. I even texted you after this happened, and I try not to, like, you know, if I know I'm watching something before you, I don't want to spoil any of the
Sure.
goodies, you know. But man, I didn't realize that James LaGrosse was in this, and boy, I got a fist pump on my couch all by myself. James LaGrosse, if you're listening, there are those of us that still love you from Phantasm 2. And, you know, just any listeners of this show, yeah, Mike, the replacement Mike from Phantasm 2, is in Psycho, the remake, as the used car salesman, and I was so tickled to see him. I've only seen him show up in, like, Justified and stuff like that recently, so, and he's great in that, but... yeah, anytime James LaGrosse shows up, it's a good movie, and it's a good use of my time to be watching.
Absolutely. Well, I had one later.
Okay.
Robert Forster. I forgot that he was in it. So when he shows up at the end as the psychiatrist, I was like, oh, yes, perfect.
Completely. And that was the moment where I was just like, you know, I kind of disliked that scene in the original one, but this time I was just like, just let Robert Forster go. He can just explain things to me for another half hour, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and it was, I mean, like, and I wondered how they're going to handle that because, like you said, there's a lot of not updating the dialogue too much, you know, still sort of like on each thing. But this whole thing of, like, at that point, because of Psycho, like in the 90s, that whole thing, like, well, he thinks he's wearing his mother's clothes. How weird. Whereas the sort of the cross-dressing killer is kind of a trope. Yeah. You know, at this point, like, I mean, Lord knows. You know, speaking of remakes, Brian De Palma has basically been remaking Hitchcock stuff, and for sure, you know, but in his own way, a ton. Yeah, so for me, like, get this, he's crazy. Be like, what? Yeah, that's a new concept to us,
right?
But I thought it was handled decently enough. But it is, there were just little things you notice, like there's no TVs anywhere, and you just think that, like, they're watching, like. Why wouldn't, if his wife's trying to sleep, why isn't he just hanging out watching TV? Why doesn't Norman Bates be like, hey, Sam, instead of bothering me, why don't you just go in cabin 2 and watch TV?
Right.
No one's here.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the only update is the one shot of Julianne Moore saying,
let me get my Walkman.
Which is now, like, incredibly dated.
Yeah.
You know, which is kind of funny.
Right. I had a Walkman, but yeah, if it's not apparent by now, like, I don't know how we can possibly go scene by scene on this movie because it's, you know, we have seen this. Yeah, exactly. So I you know, we have to talk about probably the biggest, most egregious change in this, which is Vince Vaughn peeping at Anne Heche before the shower scene. And this time he's very, very visibly masturbating. Yeah. Watching her instead of the Norman Bates one just being there was a little bit more innocence in the Norman Bates performance, I think. So
sure. I mean, because you didn't have the squishy sound effects.
I mean,
but I think it's also by doing that, by not having that sound effect, I guess we'll say that, you know, the whole idea of voyeurism and, you know, but you're watching the movie, like, that's well-trod ground by this point.
Right.
But, like, as we talked about in the first one, that's sort of like shifting allegiances with characters. So you're like, oh, well, he's watching her. I'm also watching her, though. Like, that's bad, but I've been doing it and I'm not bad. Yeah. Whereas this one is like, I'm just watching it. He's jerking off.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, he's awful. It adds to, again, like, for this performance of Vince Vaughn's Norman, totally, absolutely, he would do that.
Yeah.
But in the movie Psycho that you're basically remaking, it seems very, very out of left field. Like, it feels like it doesn't belong.
I don't know. I mean, I guess you could make the argument that his father died. He poisoned his stepfather. His mother is dead. So now he's the master of the house. So he's Master Bates.
Yes. Yep.
Boop,
pretty much.
Doom, boom, boom.
Hey, I had the Stacey's mom joke. You're fine. This is solid gold compared to what came earlier. So there better not be any booing in the audience right now because you've seen the alternative.
Yes. But yeah, it's just I feel like it's, you know, it's obviously a choice was made here, and it is just very much more like, we're going to go more lurid. We're going to go. I do keep thinking, like, we all think of Psycho as this, like, paragon of elegant filmmaking, which it is, but it was also a total sleaze fest for the time. And so absolutely. I keep thinking, Hitchcock might have been into this too. I don't know. Like that could get a little blurry right there, just like what you were saying. But like anything that goes further in the needle of modern filmmaking and modern sensibilities, sometimes I'm just like, well, Hitchcock might have gotten away with that too if he was allowed to keep going. So
he might have really enjoyed Fulci's The New York Ripper. I don't know.
Exactly.
And again, we talked about it in the first one, but like Marion Crane's whole journey to the Bates Motel is like one where she's set upon by men the entire time. Mm-hmm. Part of her connecting with Norman is that he is like, while he's a little weird, he's comforting. Mm-hmm. And you don't get that at all with Vince Vaughn. And so like, it seems like her decision to be like, I got a personal trap I got to deal with is less than sort of like identifying with him and whatever. It's more just like, I'm kind of fucked anyway. I'm just gonna go back to where it's safe.
Yeah.
Like it changes the dimensions of that. And that was something that I struggled with because for as famous as the shower scene is, and we can talk about that in a bit, but the parlor room conversation, particularly after this last watch, has become like one of my favorite
absolutely
things in the movie. And so when it's just not hitting the same, and I'm trying to like think about it and like recontextualize it in like the comparison thing, and it's like, this just doesn't work for me.
It's just not as good. Like, I mean, it just comes down to the director, like it makes me curious. How would Hitchcock have directed Vince Vaughn? That sounds like a joke on its face because it's Vince Vaughn and we all associate him with like Swingers or whatever, but like, which is a movie I enjoy, but I'm just saying like, yes, he is doofy jokester guy, but would he have directed him differently? I mean, Perkins he's got an intensity to him, but he's not 6'4" like Vince Vaughn. No offense to any tall listeners out there, but like that automatically makes you a tad more intimidating.
Anthony Perkins is like a little bit tall, but he's also spindly.
Yeah.
So it's like it's the Space Needle coming at you versus the Empire State Building. It's different things, and I think Vince Vaughn, and who I actually like really like as an actor, particularly like as some of his more recent stuff, like Brawl in Cell Block 99. He's great at that, and very physical. It's maybe that was in the back of my head, but like he's also, his whole thing is that he's very charming. And he's got a lot of whiz, as the kids say.
Does that mean 18 charisma?
Yes, he has 18 charisma.
Put it in my language.
So his performance is very like mannered. His awkwardness is very mannered because it doesn't seem like it's something that comes naturally to him.
Sure.
But you're an actor, you act. Anthony Perkins was better to sort of embody that side of Norman. And so like Vince Vaughn is all zazz.
Yeah.
He's all like showy charisma 18. He's all zazz. He needs a little bit more piz in there. And get some piz in Vince Vaughn. Mm-hmm. Lessen the zazz. I think that would help.
Totally. Yeah. That's going to carry it through to the entirety of the movie. I was even thinking at one point, and maybe it's just because I'll love Viggo Mortensen forever. He's my brother, my captain, my king. However, I wonder what he would have done with the Norman Bates role, and Vince Vaughn been in the standard hunk role right there. Like, I'd like to see Viggo play Norman.
I could totally see that.
And see what he could do. Although then you might just get like, I know Viggo would not have done an impression of Anthony Perkins, but I feel like he would have come up with some sort of weird intensity that was all his own too. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And then Vince Vaughn could have like sleptwalked through the other role, but maybe that's why this is like interesting to some degree. It's hard to say.
Read about it, and we've talked before about like when they say that someone was in consideration for the role, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but like. Names
I'm considering.
I was considered for the role by me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm considering casting Christian Bale in our next film that we're going to make.
Right. Yeah. Tobey Maguire got mentioned. I'm like, well, that would be interesting and more fitting. But at the same time,
I've seen Wonder Boys.
It's like, there's a part of this that is like, this is kind of the platonic ideal of this, of the question of this podcast, or one of the questions of this podcast anyway. Is that idea of like, well, do you change something or not?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like, the big swing was not changing anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they did, but like, the whole idea is like, well, it's just going to do this the same. And so like, it's it throws an interesting wrench into the whole thing because I kind of dislike it in a lot of ways because it is the same thing. But then I also appreciate that it's kind of the same thing and makes you think about movies in general. But as a movie, it didn't work as well because it's also like I said, the pacing, they're keeping the shots really long, and apparently like the editor was like, I want to speed this up, but no, you can't. But then, like I said, there are these weird like drum fills where all of a sudden there is a bit of quick cuts, so like rhythms of scenes seem strange. Don't even get me started on the Arbogast face stabbing cut.
Oh, that was strange too. Yeah.
What was any of that? Like, okay. That one I don't have an answer for you. That one I can't even speculate. Like, why is there all of a sudden a shot of a lamb in the road? Why is there a woman in a mask?
Well, that's okay. So let's get to the murder scenes then. So this was the other big change beyond Vince's peeping, but in both murders, there were quick flashes of other things that were thrown in there. In the shower scene, it was like lightning hitting a tree in the desert, or maybe it was just like a lightning storm. It's like literally one or two shots. It's not trying to be subliminal. It's not that fast, but it is like about a second. And then, yes, in Arbogast murder, there was like a lamb or a cow by the side of the road. And, I don't know what those are supposed to symbolize. Yeah. I'm not even sure Gus Van Sant knows. Maybe he does, but that was where we were supposed to like break away. And it just feels distracting.
Yes.
If everything else is so similar to the other one, I just felt like that took me out of, particularly in the shower sequence. It just took me out of it. And I was like, what the hell is he trying to do here?
If you are doing an experiment of doing it the same, why didn't you just do it the same?
Sure.
So you start thinking about that, about like, well, yes, you're saying if I have the camera, I'm in the same place, it's going to be a different movie, but you're actually trying to make it a different movie. Yeah. So it feels like there's some struggle with him in there to do that. And there's other things I like, but we can talk about when we get there, but like the ending shot, I kind of enjoyed versus like, I'm not saying like better than the original, but I like his take on it.
Yeah.
But these were strange. Like they didn't really gel with me. They, like you said, they felt distracting because you're like, wait a minute, was that a lamb? What am I? Oh, okay, I'm back in watching the movie now.
Yeah, it is such an incredible challenge. I noticed myself examining my own tension when we got to the shower scene, because you can make an argument that it's probably the most famous scene in cinema history, top 5 or something. Like, everybody knows that, as we've already talked about. When you're approaching that sequence, I found myself just being like, well, is he going to do something different, or is it going to be the same thing? How is this going to be different? We all know what happens here. And again, not just the red of the blood, but like the fact that it was in color was so distracting to me, because I felt like the moment when Mother approaches the shower curtain in the original, she looks so much like shadowy and kind of ghoulish and that kind of thing. Yeah. And the black and white really exacerbates that quality. And in the color version, it was just like they did a little bit of shadowy stuff, but I felt like it looked just more kind of goofy, and it just looked like Vince Vaughn kind of like cosplaying Mother there. And it was a little less brutal. And again, it's so hard to shake the reputation and just watch something play out. But it was hard for me to get behind the shower sequence in this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole thing like lacks some of the uncanniness of the 1961. And I think some of that is the best way to put it, but it's in color. Yeah. Because I mean, like we talked about in the first one, when you first see the bathroom, it is like so bright compared to everything else. And then so when he's in there later and like his face is all shadowed, it's really strange, you know, when Mother is attacking. But in this one, it's like, well, everything's kind of shadowy and whatever. It doesn't have that same kind of feeling. And even her trip to the motel didn't feel as alien as it did in the first one. Yeah. And again, like that's nothing against Anne Heche's performance. Apparently she had never seen Psycho before she did this. And so like doing her own thing, which fine. Like I have no complaints with her performance. Like it's fine. It's fine. But it was just, again, just I'm thinking about what's missing versus what's there.
I also keep thinking about what we afford to black and white movies versus color movies too, and afford may be the wrong word, but I remember on this last rewatch of the original, I was just thinking about the cleanup sequence where Norman is cleaning up after the shower. just kind of felt like it was taking a while. But if you watch a lot of older movies, and I'm not saying I'm, a scholar, but between actual older movies that I like and like black and white mystery science theater movies that I've watched, like they can be kind of slow. I just afford that sensibility to an older film at this point.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that watching it in color this time, I was just like, get on with it. Like,
yeah.
Spare me nothing about him cleaning up the blood and wrapping her in plastic and taking her to the boot of the car.
But I think some of it again is like because he's already presenting this menace. His version, Vince Vaughn's version of Norman is so just like jitters and being uncomfortable, but at the same time, because he's like the Empire State Building, it's like, well, he could just come at you at any moment.
Yeah.
Like there isn't a comfort you have with him. And so then you're not really identifying with him. You're just like, you're on edge in this way that you weren't with Anthony Perkins' Norman. Like you felt something was weird with Norman because when he starts to get the cracks start to show, you're like, uh-oh. But so you're not, you haven't shifted over into like, was it the mom that did it? Now he has to deal with it. It didn't have that same, you weren't rooting for him in the same way.
Well, and especially
and like,
after you've shown a masturbation scene.
Right, exactly. Like that was a huge part of it too. Like, well, this guy sucks. And then like when he's like done mopping and the car drives by, Perkins, and again, like I understand we're talking about like doing different things, but like Perkins' version of it, where his was a little bit more like he immediately kind of gets this smile. It felt a little bit more practiced. It felt a little bit more like, oh, he's done this before.
That's true. Yeah.
And it's a small thing, but just I was thinking of just like all the ways that this Norman was different. Mm-hmm. And again, like, is that a wrong choice? Well, not necessarily, but in this movie, yes.
Yeah.
Like in what if you're trying to do the same thing that I did before, then it doesn't really work.
Right.
But then, was the goal to make me think about the first one. Like I took in college, I took like a psychology class that was all like I don't know if you ever heard like the bystander effect, like the with the whole Kitty Genovese thing.
Oh yes,
where it's like, yeah, the people don't react to those kind of things because of diffusion of responsibility or you know all these things that like he's like when I tell people what my job is, like the kind of stuff I'm studying, they're like, well, that's all just common sense, and he's like, it is because we studied it. Like, it is because like,
right.
We said that's why this happens or whatever like that. And I feel like there's a certain amount of that. It's like where you're like, yeah, don't remake Psycho. That's a given. But Gus Van Sant went, yeah, but you have to understand why. Yeah. Like I need to show, it's one thing to just say it, but this is absolutely why.
Why we shouldn't redo this. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether or not that's a good idea, I don't know, but it does show you this is why this is a stupid move.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and then after the shower sequence, I feel like we've kind of already covered like Julianne Moore and Viggo's performance and what they do. Like once you get into that point of the original one, my interest, like it sags a little bit. I mean, still love it, but I like Norman and Marion best. Mm-hmm. And then once you get into them like searching around, it does a little bit less for me in the remake as well. And so we've got Viggo and Julianne Moore running around, and as we were saying before, her performance is like way more intense, way more like, I'll do whatever I need to do. Still got to see the toilet shot.
Yes,
great for you.
God.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Yeah. And, I've got to say, like, jumping ahead into the big reveal, because that's another just absolutely like burned on your brain bit of cinema, just looked kind of goofy in some ways. And maybe it was just because it was Vince Vaughn.
I think that's part of it. I mean, like, so instead of being in the fruit cellar now, like Mother is in this menagerie of birds.
Yes, that is the other big change.
Which, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I liked more in the, like in the second one, him just sort of like poisoning birds and collecting them, and him just like, hey, it's what I got because I can't leave Mother.
Right.
Now that same thing is still applying. He's like, well, no, I'm just going to bring the weird birds to me. Mm-hmm. But it still just felt like much more like Silence of the Lambs than Psycho.
Yeah.
And just, the way it was done a little bit differently. And then you, instead of just having Sam show up and sort of wrestle Norman there, they actually have like a bit of a fight scene. So you got to have like Norm be a bit for physicality. So it seems more like he's beaten rather than that he's destroyed. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, he lost the fight to Sam versus like this carefully constructed lie he had in his head has now just been demolished.
Sure.
And I think that took away some of the power of that a bit. And not necessarily as a result of the performances, but just like the staging, the blocking and doing that. And just in general, that like, because Vince Vaughn is much more of an imposing figure.
Right.
Than Anthony Perkins. He just is.
It is kind of like he will live to fight another day. You know, than Anthony Perkins being like just being held back. You know, he doesn't get like, he gets wrestled to the ground, but it's a different physicality. It's a different blocking when he gets pulled to the ground than Vince Vaughn. And Perkins just feels like more sad and put upon. It doesn't
have the pathos that it does with Perkins. And which is, you know, an odd thing to say for a murderer, but at the same time, like this movie does want you to, you know, the original Psycho does want you to have that. Again, is that a conscious choice here? And her like, no, but he's a murderer and he's a awful person. Like, it's good that you're watching him like get kicked around and stuff like that. I don't know. That feels a little bit less interesting to me. That feels a little bit more like boilerplate.
Sure.
You know, like Christopher Lambert could be the star of this movie. I don't know why I went to him. I thought of, there's some weird cop movie with him in there. I just thought of for some reason. I don't know. It just didn't have the same punch.
No.
Although I did like, and one thing I will give this movie is I do like some of the sound design in it. Like when she's approaching the house, so you can hear all the flies. I don't know. I really like that. It's not subtle, but I enjoyed it. And like when it's doing the final zoom in on Norman as you know, the mother's voiceover, you're hearing like a bunch of other voices. Like there's a couple of voices, and I think maybe his in there as well. And it's very disjointed. And I liked that a little bit more of the like, I understand, you know, maybe the technology wasn't there or whatever, but just that like, there's just a mess going on in there.
Right. There you go. I like that.
I thought that was kind of, those were some neat choices there.
It's a strange one. Like, I feel like I've enjoyed talking to you about it more than I have enjoyed watching it, which, you know, if that's the purpose of a $60 million experiment, I guess he succeeded, you know?
Yeah.
Did he succeed? I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I don't think that this is a worthless endeavor. It's an expensive endeavor. It's a lot of effort for this endeavor.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's worthless though, just because I like chewing on this kind of thing. I was re-listening to the end of our first episode of Psycho in this series, mainly to see like, did we ever make a bet on who got the more accurate kill count for the series? And we forgot to do that, which is funny. But both of us...
I think we did it on 2.
Oh, we might have done it on 2.
Yeah, I'll have to listen, but whatever.
Yeah, but I was just like, both of us were just like, I can't wait to watch the remake. I'm so curious. And I was legitimately curious, but then a half hour into watching it, I was like, oh God, I'm so bored. But then I started enjoying thinking about it over the next week or so. So
it's strange because I mean, some of that's a little bit of a recency bias too. I suppose because we just we watched the first one not that long ago.
That's
and
very
I was thinking
true.
about because I was thinking about when the Robert Rodriguez Sin City movie came out. I was at the time or previous to that, I was a huge fan of the comics and I read them like a whole bunch. And in the movie, I kind of got bored because I'm like, yeah, I've read this already. This looks exactly like the comics. And I was like, wait, no, that's cool.
Yeah,
it does that.
Right.
And so there's a part of that's like, yeah, I've seen this. I know these shots, I got it. But it's like, no, that's the point. That's different. So it's, I don't know. It's strange, but yeah, it's still, I think it just doesn't have that magic, baby. Yeah. I'm the same way. Like, I don't think it's worthless, but I do think you have to watch it understanding that it's a conversation with the previous Psycho. It is not a standalone movie.
Yeah.
It exists alongside this other one. Yeah. Again, like for a huge Hollywood movie, that's wild. That he did this.
Yeah.
And like, I am neither like condoning or bemoaning it. Like it is,
right.
It's just crazy that you did that. And I think that part of it is kind of cool, but like, I don't know, man. Like I said, I enjoyed talking about it much more than watching it. And it makes you appreciate that, like, you could probably, if this was never done, you could do this now, I think, a little bit more successfully in that you have a little bit, you're not just, it's the movies or it's nothing. You know what I mean? Like there's other venues.
Right.
You get this done, kind of thing done. So yeah, it's a lot of chutzpah in doing this. And I don't hate it. I guess I'll put it that way. Like it's just, as a movie, no thanks, but as a conversation with the other movie, yeah, I think that's kind of interesting.
It's interesting. I do feel like I'll be thinking about it for a while. Yeah. And also, man, if this doesn't ring something true for anybody just being like, oh, I could make that movie. like this, like kind of Sunday morning quarterbacking of some movies. It's just like, yes, it was Psycho, one of the greatest films ever made, but you still have an enormously talented person like Gus Van Sant who is attempting something like this. And it's just like, you know what? There is a magic to movies that either happens or doesn't. And that's not discounting all of the talent that goes into it. I'm just saying there's just something that comes together to make a movie, and different choices happen and that kind of thing. But still, if someone as talented as him could not do it, then, you know, take that, internet.
Well, yeah. I mean, but it's also that, like, you know, you put there's always restraints on you when you're making a movie, whether those are intentional or otherwise. But like, having the more specific restraints of this thing, I know like Christopher Doyle would complain about, like, why can't I just move the camera this way or do that? Or like I said, the editor wanted to cut it a little bit faster in places. So like, do you let those, you know, because you're tracing at a certain degree of this, but like, do you let that, do you find ways to be creative within that? Or do you just sort of accept, like, well, I have to do it exactly just like this?
Sure.
And I think there's examples of both in this movie.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about that I found very unnerving real quick, just before we leave entirely. The shot we both really liked from the first one.
Yes.
It's just wrong in this.
Yeah,
it's just wrong.
I'm so glad you remembered that, because
it's weird because like Vince Vaughn, like, he goes so low down to it, like he's nearsighted. It's almost comical how weird it is. And so on one hand, I'm like, okay, you looked at this and were like, well, I don't want to just do it exactly the same. Yeah. But you did it in like the weirdest way, and it didn't work for me, but I kind of appreciate that he went for it, but it just like, it felt wrong. It was weird. I wrote in my note, and I was just like, they both look a little creepy. Then the great shot happens, leaning in. It just looks weird and different now without the shadows and without the black and white. Yeah. I go back to the color versus black and white. The angles are strange. Yeah. It's just like, the bit in this famous concerto where the violins take over. What if we replace that with a didgeridoo? You know? And it's like, it doesn't work.
It's not doing it. Yeah.
But we know for sure now.
Right.
For sure.
We tried. Yes. We tried. It is on record. All right. Well, let's honor our dead before we get out of here real quick. Marion Crane, played by Anne Heche, stabbed multiple times in the shower. Detective Milton Arbogast, played by William H. Macy, face slashed, falls downstairs and stabbed again. Hey, look at that. Just 2 that time, just like the first time. Nobody extra. So, but I don't remember if we decided how many deaths were going to happen in this entire series, including the remake. But if I've obviously already looked this up, but if you would like to take a general guess. Yeah. Not a high body count. Yeah. I mean, I got to say, like, there's a bunch I feel like there was a bunch in 4, and I'm going to say like 18 maybe total. You were close. 20 okay. Over the 5 films, because the first one and the remake only have 2 apiece, and then they had to up the body count, which we'll talk about in the wrap up, of course. The bodies to fit with the slasher motif. I mean, I don't know how to sum this up better than what we just talked about just before the in memoriam, but I don't know. I'd say give it a watch, but watch it thinking about the first movie. I mean, obviously you can't help but think of it, but I'm just like, I don't know, just don't discount it. Maybe just like give yourself a little bit of license to like kind of ponder this a little bit. Yeah. It's instead of going like, well, this is wrong, you know, I realize I just said that it's wrong. It's wrong. Instead of doing that for everything. Okay, let me put it this way. Don't do it the dumb way like you do it. Do it the smart way like I do it when you say it's wrong. But like think about when you're watching it, like if stuff doesn't feel right, think about why that is. Think about why it's not clicking in the same way. And it could be, you know, and it's you know, so there's a certain amount of movie going that is absolutely just subjective. Yeah. You know, some stuff's going to work for you, some stuff isn't. But I think there's objectively some weird stuff here that's like, well, why did you know, this shows why that all works, why you have these performances and that, you know, and you know, use that knowledge going forward. Think about that, you know, so now I'm like,
now I'm primed to do this. Now I want to watch other like remakes and even just other movies and think more about like, oh, what was he going for here? So it's a neat little film school education right there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what is going on over at John and Alex Hate Stuff this week?
John's Hate Stuff. Speaking of high quality films, we are going to be watching Hard Ticket to Hawaii.
Heck yeah, man. Love that movie.
Yeah, Andy Sedaris, Blue Bookological, 80s action nonsense. Special guest talking about that. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And if you like short narrative horror stories, check out Please Leave. And we'll be ramping stuff up for the Halloween season. And I guess this is as good a time as any to let everyone know that, we're for the month of October, we're going to be going back to our weekly schedule because it is Halloween season. Why not watch more horror movies? And if you'd like to get a jump start on that, we are going to be covering Pumpkinhead. The 4 movies in the Pumpkinhead series. I'm extremely excited to get to these. I hope I'm not disappointed partway through the first one. I actually really enjoy the first one. I've not seen a single one of the sequels. Yeah. I'm just ready to watch some monster goodness.
Yeah. I'm ready for some creatures rascaling around.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm excited about. So everybody out there, fire up your Blu-ray players or your Tubies or whatever you got going on and watch the Pumpkinhead series along with us. And we've got some other kind of fun stuff planned for October as well. So we'll keep you posted on that. So if you want to get in touch with us, check out thismayhurtabitpod@gmail.com or thismayhurtabitpod on Instagram. That's kind of where I keep up with most everything over on that thing. Twitter kind of dying out, so I'm not doing much over there anymore. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this Psycho remake as much as we did, at least talking about it.
Or did we?
Yeah, I don't know. Did we like this movie? I still don't even know.
Yeah.
I enjoyed talking about it with my bud, but that's about it. Yeah. So, but yeah, join us next week and we will do the Psycho wrap up of the everything Psycho except for, a couple of things that I didn't bother watching. But, we'll talk about that in a week. So thanks for joining us and good night.
Good night.
This has been a Two Penguins media production. It was produced by James Strayer and edited by John C. Myers. Logo by Ethan Kimberling and music by Michael Arthur Holloway, who you can find on Bandcamp. Follow us on Instagram at thismayhurtabitpod and on Twitter at hurtabit. Email us at thismayhurtabit@gmail.com. And if you are so inclined, rate and review us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll see you next time.